The panel this morning is around innovation and the impact of that within your organisation. So with that in mind, if you could just open up by introducing yourselves, your organisation and what innovation means to you. Richard, if I pass to you first.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Rich Corbridge. I'm the Director General for Digital at the Department of Work and Pensions. Only 6 months in. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say I'm still new, but it feels it some days. So what does innovation mean to DWP? It's interesting to follow the Minister. I'm not going to say for DWP it's a triathlon. It feels way more like the whole Olympics, if I'm absolutely honest, as far as how we actually tackle the different challenges that are out there. Trying to get innovation right in an organisation a bit like healthcare where you can't get anything wrong is super challenging. Because unlike other, I'm from retail previously to being at DWP, 80% of getting innovation right was okay. You can't afford to be 80% right with innovation in DWP. You can't let 20% of people not get their benefits, not get their pension. So getting innovation to move at pace and not let anything fall through the cracks is probably the biggest part of what we're trying to do. Innovation, back to again the Minister's point, is fundamentally what we need to be able to do, because we can't keep running our services in the way that we have. Tech debt, legacy that we have, the ability to constantly add more people to our workforce to help people get into jobs is not the way that we can innovate, is not the way that DWP can continue to support the most vulnerable people across the UK. And I think that's why innovation feels like it's something we have to really get hold of and do it in a considered, calm way that makes a big difference.
Thank you, Richard. James?
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me as well. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm James Freed. I run the Digital Academy, or the NHS Digital Academy. So I've got an interest in digital skills, by which I don't just mean technical skills. So I mean the sorts of things you need as part of how you operate in the 21st century, really. And there's a flavour for that for all staff in a workforce. There's a flavour for that for senior leaders. There is, of course, a flavour for that for digital data and technology professionals as well. What I'd like to do is, I suppose, present that triathlon, but in a slightly different way, and tell a story which comes to the conclusion that that digital skills agenda is probably the most important thing, well, for me anyway, when it comes to innovation. And it all comes back to why on earth we innovate in the first place, really. So there were elements of that triathlon which they're value statements to me. And I think this is all about how we collectively and individually add more value more quickly. I think it's those two things. Now, in health and care, we're very lucky as an international community that's established what value means for health and care. And there are 4 elements. It's called the quadruple aim. Everyone forgets it because it's got loads and loads of words in it, and I'm going to summarise it in a way which means that you, more so than most health and care professionals, will remember it now. It's going to be from a user-centred perspective, 4 perspectives. The first is the patient. You can never forget about the patient, or if you're in mental health, the service user. Better health outcomes, but also just better experience in general, and really importantly, less harm. We do harm people in health and care, not deliberately, of course, but it does happen. And doing that less is important. That's number 1. Number 2, the workforce is an end in its own right to making things better for our own workforce. Better health and well-being, less stress. It will not have passed you by that we've had a number of industrial actions recently. That's an indicator of stress in the workforce. It means we're not doing great on that second value statement. Third one, the taxpayer. So whether it be articulated as efficiency or spending less money or productivity, doing more for less, basically, is that third measure that I will summarise by the user of the taxpayer. And fourth, the general public, bearing in mind that it's better to not get ill in the first place than to have really good health and care services. And now you will never forget the quadruple aim. Patients, workforce, taxpayer, public. Innovation is all about doing things for those 4 value statements in health and care better and faster. And we can either do that by doing more of what we've always done in health and care. That's more doctors, more nurses, more GP surgeries, more outpatients clinics, more knee surgeries, more care homes. Or you can do different. And different is what innovation is. That's it. It's more or different, or as we've articulated in the Health and Care Workforce Plan, more and different. We need both. Different is tricky. As Cole mentioned, a vast majority and an ever-increasing vaster majority, a large proportion of different is underpinned by digital technologies or data use. Digital is becoming the way in which we do different better. My estimate is about 95% of different is underpinned by digital in some way. That's based on some anecdotal stats. So for instance, we've got a clinical entrepreneurship program, 64 people were on it, 63 of them, this is a non-digital program, 63 of them were delivering digital innovations. But 70% of digital initiatives fail, or maybe 80 to 90%. We're using slightly different stats, slightly different things, but for all digital initiatives, for all change initiatives across all industries in all countries, about 70% of them fail, and they fail mostly for cultural and skills-related reasons. These are things that can be addressed by educational levers, and I think I'll leave my intro there, but that's the reason why I think that trying to address a skills deficit issue, not just for digital professionals, but for everyone in our workforce, potentially everyone in our client group as well, is what I think is going to be the single most impactful thing on realising more value more quickly.
Thanks very much, James. Thank you. Dan?
And I'm Dan Brember, Deputy Director for Content Policy and Strategy at gov.uk. I'm also delighted to be here. I think innovation for us obviously is integral. I think we occupy a unique position at the centre of government. Indeed, within Minister Quinn's department, Government Digital Services has been there now for a decade. We exist, I suppose, to support other government departments to deliver better services to citizens. Innovation for us in that context is about identifying what are the ways that, from our position at the centre, we're able to, without the particular sort of delivery pressures that is acute in some of our larger operational departments, like, for instance, DWP and HMRC, we can undertake some work at the centre which has the potential to be scaled across other digital departments and services. I think in that context, it's for us, the integral importance of us working hand in glove with departments like Rich's to identify where, for instance, the opportunities for us to trial, to experiment, to innovate in pursuit of assisting DWP or HMRC or Ministry of Justice or Home Office, for instance, to solve some of the urgent sort of operational conditions and pressures that they face is one of our greatest focuses. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, Richard, if we start with yourself, the theme of innovation isn't new. It's been around for a while, and I know that the larger government departments have been investing heavily in it for quite some time now. How are you and your organisation looking at how innovation matures through your organisation?
It's a really good point. As you try to invest in it, it plays to what Cole was saying at the beginning, doesn't it? How do you force innovation, or how do you create a culture where it just is part of everything we do? One of the things that DWP's done is resist the temptation to create a single innovation lab in London that looks shiny, that is bright and sparkly, but doesn't actually get out into our business. So we have the concept of a job centre of the future, 4 of those scattered hither and thither around the UK. Rather than creating an innovation lab a few hundred metres from here in Caxton House, let's actually create the capability in those 4 job centres of the future to have innovation with our customers, innovation with our colleagues live in there. And I think the other thing around innovation as well is we get quite hung up on, again, the bright and sparkly new things. For DWP, with our, use my words carefully, but a slightly knackered estate, shall we describe it, 800 job centres that aren't the most attractive buildings in the world, let's be honest. How do we make those attractive? How do we turn that into a retail-like omni-channel experience where a customer, somebody who needs help, walks in and feels like they're getting the same experience they got on their phone at home, or feels like they're getting a better experience than they got on the telephone? So one of the weirdest innovations that I've seen in the last 6 months in post is literally a digital board with QR codes on that people can scan the QR code and apply for a job in a job centre. Now, that's not innovation in reality, is it? That's like tech that we would have done together in the NHS, 10 years ago. But the difference it made when it went up, as people could go in, see a job, see an hourly rate, scan a QR code, and apply for the job with their thumb in a job centre, was just sparkling. To be able to actually see somebody see that as innovation and land that with people, changing the culture of our customers, changing the culture of our colleagues who are now able to load the local jobs with the skills of people who are walking in. So today, it's a digital jobs fair in Pudsey in Leeds. Those jobs on that board will be about digital jobs across the Leeds region. People walking in, scanning the QR code and applying for a job there and then. So for me, that landing innovation isn't just AI and quantum computing. It is the thing that we haven't done before because it was slightly more expensive, slightly more difficult than we thought it was going to be, and making that land.
Brilliant, thank you. James, Dan, anything to add on that?
I think nothing to add in particular on that point. I think sort of one of the challenges that we've had, sort of slightly dissimilar, I suppose, to the DWP one, is that, as I mentioned earlier, GDS is now a decade old, and the conditions, the context in which we were established has changed very much over the course of that decade. The digital maturity, the capability, the confidence and the ambition of departments, in some instances, far outstrips that at the centre. And one of the sort of the critical things that we've been doing over the course of the last 2 years under Tom Reed's leadership, who you'll hear from later on, is really sort of pivoting our organisation to reflect that, and to ensure that our sort of operational conditions within our organisation are really acknowledging of the growth that's happened outside of ourselves. And so we're taking more inputs from departments around us, taking more inputs from the wider world around us, who traditionally we would have sort of looked at and presumed actually we were well ahead of. And I think that has certainly over the course of the last 18 months or so really accelerated a cultural shift for us in order to take on more inputs from outside and help us to think about actually what are the ways in which we can learn from other organisations.
It's fascinating that the catalyst that GDS has become as departments lean back in to hear what other departments are doing and share. You've become the sort of the glue that connects everybody, and I think that's an amazing way to think about the future.
Yeah, and the language actually. So things like the GDS service manual have formed very much the bedrock, the spine of the sorts of things that we need to support education for our entire workforce. I was going to reflect on something that you said about the difference of approach. Do you have like a shiny innovation centre responsible for innovation? No one can do innovation apart from these people. They're the innovation people. Or whether it's something that's a bit more diverse. And I was thinking about business models. So I think if you're a Specsavers who wants to diversify completely and change their business model, I can see why you need a specialist team to think about it. Yeah. But in public sector, we kind of know who we're serving. We kind of know what services we're providing, and we kind of need to just make sure we provide them better. To quote Tom Loosemore, actually, users raised expectations. And so our conclusion has been that we want to support as many people as possible in the services that they provide to deliver more value more quickly. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we found is this cultural stumbling block, actually, this sort of recognition. I don't think it's exclusively to health and care, but because it's dangerous, people are focused so much on safety. You cannot compromise on safety at the expense of doing things quickly. So you have a hierarchy, you have people that can say no in all manner of ways, but takes a long time. It takes a long time to get an approval to make something happen. But it's all with good at its heart. It's intending to stop harm from happening. Yeah. And we run a digital boards program. We support NHS boards, hospital boards, to think about how they create a culture of innovation. Well, digital culture is how we phrase it. And really the two big things that we're trying to support them to do is develop a data-driven approach and a user-centered approach, and it's where they can retain that safety but also gain pace. The digital world is all about speed.
You may have already answered this question, James. I'm going to ask it anyway, though, so to give the other panellists a chance. But James, I'll direct this to you. We've talked a lot this morning around culture and making sure that innovation is successful by embedding the right culture within your organisations. So how do you see government departments and other organisations maturing to embed that culture of innovation and the continuous learning that's going to be required to make sure that people can grab the opportunity that technology and innovation can bring.
Yeah, continuous learning is a real key, isn't it? It's probably worth starting this story on where people are now, or maybe where they were a couple of years ago. So we did some discovery work on board perspectives, so particularly chief executive and chair perspectives of digital. And no one actually said what I'm about to say, but nonetheless, this was absolutely the tenor of almost all of our responses. Digital scares us. We don't get it, and when we try it, we get it wrong, and when we get it wrong, we get fired. That's basically what people were saying. So, oh my gosh, please can I not try it on my watch? Or if I have to, which they have to, how do I mitigate that risk? And so what chief executives were doing were hiring chief information officers. And then they were saying, right, this is your problem. This is your responsibility. We don't get it. What ended up being is a sort of an imbalance of power between chief execs and chief information officers in the health service. Only about a third of CIOs were on boards in the first place to have those sorts of conversations. And you had different conversations happening with different ends in mind. You had digital strategies that were not aligned to business strategies, by and large. Things have changed over the last few years. In fact, the biggest change was COVID, oddly. We had a situation where every single NHS trust in the country was suddenly saying, oh my goodness, I need to change fundamentally my business model. All of those, what has been a face-to-face industry cannot be a face-to-face industry anymore. How are we going to address this? I need to understand this digital thing. And at a time where we launched our digital boards program, we suddenly had to eliminate all comms to launch it because everyone was struggling with COVID, and we actually exceeded our targets because people came to us. They were saying, we need to understand this. But to come back to your continuous improvement point. So I mentioned two things, and I didn't really elaborate on them. One was data-driven and one was user-centered, and that's I believe, are the two key things for cultures in general, very much predicated on the service standard, 14 points boiled down into 2. But for senior leaders, having decisions made primarily from the perspective of the people who you serve. So what value am I adding to the people who I serve, and how do I do that? How do I prioritise that? And secondly, how do I stop making knee-jerk decisions based on subjective perception? How can I collect data to inform that decision and to know that I'm making the right decisions as I go through when there isn't a penalty for making a guess and getting it wrong? There's only a penalty for not asking the question and not collecting the data and then making a decision. I mean, crikey, no one wants to waste another, how much was the National Programme for IT? £12 billion? On the largest failed public sector IT project in history, ladies and gentlemen. No one wants to do another one of those. You've got to have the right data to inform the decisions that you're trying to make.
Continuous learning, though, and I love the way you bring in that there. So the national programme and all the stuff it did do in healthcare, yes, it spent an inordinate amount of money with lots of people running around for many years desperately trying to innovate, being told to innovate. But it did make some difference. It did create continuous learning. It did start to deliver a digital fabric that was about changing outcomes. And I think that's where continuous learning really starts to apply in government. When at DWP, our Secretary Permsec is saying the organisation has to be focused around outcomes. This is no longer the business and IT, it's our business, and we're here to change and deliver outcomes for the most vulnerable people in the UK. And whether we're working with HMRC, ONS, it doesn't matter who we're working with. We have to have this single-minded focus that innovation in a collaborative, sense-making way across government is about changing the outcomes that we want to deliver for citizens. And if you put that as a theme through everything, suddenly, whether it's in stuff that James is doing, if it's stuff that we're trying to help and understand from GDS in that bi-directional relationship that's being created, we're not here to innovate, we're here to find ways to create better outcomes for everybody who needs the government support. And if that becomes our culture instead, back to Cole's point, then suddenly innovation becomes, dare I say, easier, because it's about something tangible and real that you can see just in front of you.
Yeah, innovation and digital, they're both means to an end.
Yeah.
They're not an end in their own right.
Sorry, we're ranting.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. By way of advanced warning, I'm going to ask one more question and I'm going to open up to the floor. So if you do want to ask a question, if you can start preparing your thoughts on it now, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so my last one, Dan, Richard, I'll direct this one to yourself.
Don't jump in, Dan. We're taking over too much.
We've spoken a lot around the culture and innovation, obviously, as our theme of the day, and we're all broadly on board with that. And if we then look at what Gartner is saying are our barriers to success, I'd be really interested in all of your views as to, for you personally, and for what you're trying to achieve, what is your largest barrier to success at the moment of embedding that innovation into your organisation?
Sadly, for me at DWP, and for me in my previous role at Boots, the biggest barrier is actually the legacy of what we've got. Because big organisations have jumped from thing to thing. And therefore there's this massive long tail of stuff that is really hard to try and pull into yesterday, never mind the future. So when you're literally, I'll use Boots so I don't embarrass anybody in DWP. If you're Boots and you're trying to keep a 67-year-old person to work here because they're the only person left in the UK who understands the code of your warehouse system on Black Friday, then how do you innovate on that? Like, suddenly you're going, I need to work out how to get a life support machine for the man that wrote it in the 1980s, not innovating for the future on where we go. So for me, and there is a story in there around DWP, it's massive, it's huge, it moves a lot of money, it supports lots of vulnerable people, and some of what we've got is very, very old. It's bloody bulletproof, it does what it says on the tin and keeps going. But when you try and innovate at pace, or innovate without costing a small fortune, it becomes really difficult to do because it's so old and so clunky to build on top of it.
Thank you. Dan?
I think possibly one of the biggest challenges we've had possibly has been culture within GDS. Historically, I mean, we've got a really engaged workforce who love the things that they build, the services they deliver, the products that we run. And they're really passionate about that. And some of the standards that sit around those have been developed over the course of 10 years. And in the context of one of the critical things that we have done within GDS in order to stimulate more innovation is by bringing in external voices. So we, for instance, over the course of the last 2 years or so, amongst the senior teams, there's been a large amount of external hires, and that's been with the purpose of identifying great talents, people with experience of having done some of the things that we're seeking to do in wider industry and in other sectors, and trying to bring them into GDS to stimulate some more change. And that was a critical sort of enabler or accelerant of the new GovUK strategy, which we launched in May, which was about expanding what was effectively a 20th century solution with a website, and recognizing that the world doesn't sort of engage with information that way anymore, and we needed to be omni-channel, to Rich's point earlier. Taking people who have spent a long time working on that one product and are very proud of it, rightly, has been challenging, and I think sort of creating the conditions in which change is not seen as a threat, even by our own teams. And similarly, actually, the idea that there are good ideas elsewhere that weren't created in government, and our context isn't, for instance, so unique that we can't learn anything from outside, has probably been one of those biggest challenges. I think we're at the sort of the end of that sort of change curve right now, if you will, and we're motoring, we're delivering, we're sort of, as Tom will talk about a little bit later on today, we're nearing the launch of a new GovUK app, for instance, which we think will fundamentally transform the user experience of government for users. But it's been difficult, I think, taking our own people with us on that journey.
Brilliant. Thank you. James, anything to add?
Given that this is a multifactorial and complex problem, it's difficult to simplify, but and there's the dangers there. But I agree with Rich. So for health and care, I think it's infrastructure and governance. So we interviewed 600 nurses about what a digitally ready NHS would look like, and they said, "Please, could I have? Thanks very much for talking about your AI and your shiny stuff." That is a direct quote. Please, can you just give me a decent modern day device, decent connectivity wherever I am, a decent electronic patient record, or CRM to you and I, that I can write to and read from. And please, please, please stop writing policies that prevent me from using the first three. That's what they asked for.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so now's your opportunity. Yes, thank you very much, gentleman here on the left.
Thanks. Alan Hill from Splunk. I recognise a lot of those stories as being a public sector CIO myself. The key thing for me is here, I think, James, you said it, I don't want to get fired, not invented here, and other barriers to stop us making progress. Whereas if we look into DWP in Richard's area, where significant advancements have been made in innovations around counter-fraud, for example, how you lift those ideas for the rest of public sector, where billions of pounds have been lost to fraud, is seemingly an insurmountable problem. How do we take good ideas more broadly across government and really make it work?
It's an amazing point to make, and in the last 2 weeks, this is the third sort of gathering of people talking about government and digital that I've been to. And collaboration and making sense of stuff together has been the key theme. We've got GDS, we've got CDDO. We, as departments and agencies and the machinery of government, need to find a way to lean in more. As I took over as Director General of Digital at DWP, there was a general consensus that CDDO, Cabinet Office, GDS were the police, and we were the people trying to do stuff that hopefully the police didn't stop us from doing. And actually, 6 months in, that's not true. We, if we lean in, can find ways to support each other, whether it's sharing data, which is probably the biggest goal I think that we need to get cracked in the next couple of years, is how do we make sure that a piece of information that DWP has with the consent of the person can be shared with the NHS, can be shared with ONS, can be shared with different government departments, meaning that the citizen of the UK has a single journey across government services. So for me, we do have the mechanisms in place. We just need to relearn as departments how we lean into those organisations. Megan's organisation, Tom's organisation, they're not here to kick us and slap us. They're here to help us work out how do we get the most from each other. The NHS went through this, and I keep pointing at James. We used to work together a little bit many, many moons ago when we were 12 years old. And the NHS spent a long time learning how to trust each other and that it wasn't in competition. It has now cracked that. But it took a bit of stick and a bit of carrot for the NHS to learn that it has to lean into itself to get there. I remember being at a meeting in London with 2 chief execs from the NHS who wouldn't have the same electronic health record as each other. And when pushed why they wouldn't have the same electronic health record as each other, it was because they didn't want one or the other to take over that NHS organisation. Absolute crap from a patient point of view and from a culture point of view and a people point of view. But the NHS went through that turning point. Bigger government, departmental and machinery of government is now, because of leaders like Megan and like Tom, going through that change and that learning, I hope.
Dan, anything to add on that?
I fundamentally agree that sort of some of those building blocks, those foundational elements, which we can, if we can get right, if we can make genuine progress on them, unlock so much more. I am hopeful. I think to your point around that sense of there is a common purpose that spans departments. We know uniquely, whether we're in HMRC or whether we're in Home Office or DWP, for instance, that we are all shooting for the same aims in terms of what we're delivering. How we then recognise that, for instance, in the way in which funding allocations are determined, the extent to which there are cross-departmental bids, for instance, at spending reviews for common projects and programmes that would help us to realise some of those things with the funding to enable them, is a different matter. I'm conscious that there's no one from HMT here, for instance, to tell us that that's possible. But yeah, I totally agree.
Brilliant, thank you. Any more questions from the floor? Oh, wonderful. Can we take the lady at the front here, please? Excellent, thank you.
Run.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Hi, just checking it's working okay.
It is, yeah.
Okay. So, James, I'm excited to hear you talk about things like business models and operating models. I think they can be forgotten when we talk about innovation and digital culture. But for me, those are really important to help us understand the value and the realisation of that value that you talked about. I think they're also important to help us understand technology and how it can enable us achieve our vision. It shows us how information needs to flow, and it also helps to get to the outcomes that Rich was talking about as well. So within the business model and the operating model, what are the outcomes for each element of those things that we want to achieve? But do you think there's an appetite in government to think about this big picture, to think about these sort of broader areas of transformation as the context for innovation?
Yeah, I do. I mean, to be honest, I think this is a question for Dan, because I look to GDS for those sorts of answers. Hand over to you.
Yeah, there is. There absolutely is. And you see, for instance, I mean, James, you talked about governance earlier, and the sort of desire, for instance, to create that sense that executives in the wider NHS also had some skin in the game when it came to digital transformation, etc. We're doing the same in government currently. Only within the last, I think, 18 months or so, we've established the first permanent secretary-level board, the Digital and Data Board, which has responsibility for providing oversight to and sort of assuring the digital transformation of government more generally, and critically identifying where the opportunities for join up are. To the earlier question, right, the gentleman had over there, around what are the ways in which, for instance, we can identify discrete projects or programs or innovations that are proving successful in one part of government and consider how that could be scaled more widely. Establishing, I suppose, what is the sort of the wider ambition is, again, a conversation that is currently taking place right now. I think it's being led in the main by Megan Lee and CDDO, who are convening digital leaders, not just digital leaders, but wider sort of policy leaders too across government, to think about actually, digital is a tool in which we can realise some of the benefits for wider society that we're all pulling for. I think one of the things that will flow from that, and Tom will be able to talk about a little bit more this afternoon, not that I'm sort of shunting it all to him, but you don't want to upstage your boss, right? That's not good practice, so I'll leave it for him. But there is a vision emerging that sort of brings together the priorities that span justice, home affairs, benefits, taxation, for instance, that can coalesce around a shared vision with a roadmap really for delivering something that adds value to wider society. So yeah, hopefully that reassures you that it is happening.
Do you mind if I add something?
Yeah, do.
So, because you asked about business models and service models, and I find this fascinating. We are a young industry. The digital industry is a very young industry, and bear in mind, I come from health and care where, being a doctor has its oath based in ancient Greece. There's a bit of history there. People still remember when the professional body was surgeons and barbers. They don't actually remember from being there personally. That is a good couple of hundred years ago. But what I really like about GDS, so what GDS provided for government and by extension for the NHS was a language and a structure. So a service model, brilliant. 41 named roles with capabilities. The digital data and technology framework is awesome, because then you start saying, oh, right, oh my goodness, there's a thing called a user researcher. Oh, if I'd known about that, I'd have got one of those. But now we know, right? And there actually are some user researchers in the NHS, which is brilliant, a step forward. However, how you distribute those skills, there isn't a service model. So we've got a service model for specific digital teams working on digital products, very discrete. But actually, most NHS services are not predominantly digital services. They might use digital tools to deliver an outpatient service or deliver a surgery service, but they're not predominantly a digital service. And understanding how you incorporate those digital skills into the service models, we had a head of professions council the other day, and we agreed there isn't a service model. There's no service model that helps us understand how we deploy those skills better. If it was one for every single service just in the acute sector, that's 80,000 digital data and technology professionals, which is more than we've got already in the whole of the NHS, more than doubling. So we don't have a service model quite there yet. What I do know is, in wider industry, the Gartner data again, 10% of digital data and technology staff are employed in some sort of centralised function, a chief technology officer, a chief of information officer function. 41% of what would be called technologists, self-identifying technologists, are business technologists. They are integrated into the business units. There's actually a minority of people now who are not technologists of some regard in a company, in a workforce. 49% are users. 51% are deliverers in some way. So I use this as a trend for democratisation of digital. I think we are going to see more digital professionals embedded into service teams, regardless of whether those services are predominantly digital functions or not.
Identifying as a business technologist, I love that phrase. When you get to the point where you stop talking about the business and IT, and you start talking about our business that we're trying to do, then that outcomes theme runs through it, and you're not there to deliver tin and wires anymore. You know, when James was talking about CIOs on NHS boards, there used to be this general joke across NHS CIOs that were there for the 3 Ps at the board: PowerPoint, the projector, and power. They weren't there to be part of the board, to offer assistance or conversations. They were there to make sure all the other execs' presentations worked. And the amount of times that I've crawled under a desk to plug the chief exec's laptop in is beyond recognisable for that period of time. So when we get to that point where people are self-identifying as business technology transformation people, what a brilliant moment in time. When GDS talks about being the transformation catalyst for government, not the digital service for government, when our gens start to realise that IT people are the transformation agents. You don't need a transformation department at DWP. Sorry, Peter. You need a really good digital department, because they are the people who know how to do transformation better than anybody else in the organisation. We keep getting on these little soapboxes, don't we?
I'm a big fan of business and IT coming together as a single unit. There are a couple of other hands. Gentleman here in the blue jumper, then I'll come to yourself, and then there's a gentleman at the back. So we've got time for the 3? Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this. In one way or another, you all spoke about how it's essential to get the basics right, whether it's for patients, job seekers, the general public. And Dan, you also mentioned that change can be seen as a threat. With that in mind, how do you find the space to innovate, and how do you persuade senior leaders that different is sometimes better than more, and maybe is essential for that end user?
Thank you.
Weirdly, I don't think within sort of my own context of GDS and Cabinet Office, for instance, we necessarily have any problem persuading senior leaders that different is better than more. I think they're pretty well attuned to the idea that efficiency is efficiency, and if we can deliver that for citizens, that's a good thing. I think some of the challenge we have, and Rich mentioned it earlier with sort of shiny things, is maintaining focus on genuine innovation that will deliver sort of measurable benefits, tangible benefits to end users in the face of hype technologies. And oftentimes there is a real impetus to focus on delivering a solution that's optimized around that hype technology, as opposed to thinking about actually how could we apply this in a more general sense to realize sort of something that is more beneficial to our way of working, for instance. I think that's probably the reflection that I've got.
And Richard, in terms of finding the space for innovation, how have you gone about identifying that within DWP?
So, we've touched on it already. I think we find the space by making sure it's at the coalface, that it's with our colleagues, that it's making an impact on our customers. If you've got something where you're testing and learning, you're not doing it in a lab where it's disconnected. You're doing it with people who are going to use the system. You're doing it with customers, citizens who are touching and feeling it and giving you feedback. And I think that for me in the last 6 months has been a massive leap forward, where we can really get people to see and feel what the difference will be that the simplest of innovations make. I mean, crikey, we've managed a whole hour and a half on an innovation panel without talking about the dreaded AI words. But how do we get to the point where we're making space for AI to be considered by getting it in front of colleagues and getting it in front of people who need our services?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Gentleman on the right-hand side here. My right-hand side, anyway. Sorry.
Hi, it's John Wright, 101 Ways. Hopefully it's a quite quick question. You talked quite a lot about collaboration, and you mentioned about one login earlier on, and I'm absolutely passionate about the subject of identity. With that in mind, we've also got DWP and NHS on the panel. Do they currently have plans for implementing one login? And I could ask the same to HMRC if they were there, because that's going to be the barrier to the acceptance of one login.
Like you said, it's a quick question, it's a quick answer. Yes, and this year.
I think we're a yes as well, but you're probably better answering this one for me. Is it yes for the NHS as well?
Yes, and not this year.
Right. Sorry, I'm more on a skills side. Not tech side.
And HMRC, yes, next year.
Fantastic. That was a quick question. Thank you very much. Gentleman at the back, right at the back.
Good morning, Tristan Thorpe, DWP Digital, so I promise I'll be good, boss. We talked about innovation this morning and within the digital arms across all government departments, but how do we, I hope you take this in the right context, how do we discourage traditional digital departments from, when we talk about innovation, automatically launching to the next application, the newest platforms, the newest infrastructure, rather than sometimes looking back on what we already have, what the department's already exploiting, and try and exploit them even better? So to the point around, we can either do the same thing or we can do better. Sometimes we can do better by understanding what we already have and exploiting that rather than investing in huge projects, and that can be difficult, I guess, within digital organisations that want the latest shiny thing. So how do you move the dial a little bit to get people to kind of exploit more of what's already there?
So I'll go first, but I definitely want you guys to help out on this one when it's directed at me from one of my colleagues. So how do we do it? I think what we're trying to do, I keep saying the damn same words, but the outcomes piece. So how do we do it? We look at what the outcomes are we're trying to achieve. We look at what we've got already. For us, which I think the question is alluding to some degree, our data model is not in the greatest of spaces, and that means that some of the things that we've implemented and done aren't releasing the amount of value they ought to be. So let's fix the fuel that goes through the systems so that we can do the most with it. When it's our business that's coming up with new shiny ideas, that's a different model entirely around how do we must not get to the place where we say, dear person, do not talk to the tech industry unless you come through the digital department. I would hate to be in that situation. But please have us at the table when you open those conversations about transformation, not about bright and shiny tech things that are there. And I think those two or three sort of get the data flowing through our systems right, will release better value from the systems we've got, will allow us to build on that and facilitate the rest of our organisation in having great relationships with the catalyst for change.
Yeah, so there was quite a lot behind that question. So, because it implies that it's better to exploit what you've got already than to do something new. And that is true if the net benefit of exploiting is better. So that's the next sort of line of the net value, I suppose, that you get. So the implication is if you're exploiting your existing tech, it costs less. There's less impact on any change that you're trying to make because people are used to maybe the technologies you're using or whatever it might be. You know, there are certain benefits to exploiting existing technology rather than doing something new. The first thing that I say is beware of the shiny being the reason for doing something. And sometimes we confuse innovation as a means to an end with innovation as an end in its own right. The word innovation sounds like, oh, you know, let's do that. That's the thing that I want. And actually, the more senior you get, the more attractive it gets. Having said that, so there are tools and techniques that are tried and trusted, you know, decades old, whether it be the concept of the business case, whether it be the concept of standards about how you make decisions, which can be applied. If you take the sort of the new digital world into account, it's the concept of the discovery phase, I would say. Make sure you understand your problem before you start jumping into any solutions, because actually we all do it. We're human beings. We hallucinate. We hold hammers, and then suddenly everything looks like a nail. And on both sides of the equation, on the I want something new versus I want to exploit something that is already there, both sides will have a sort of a solutionized mindset, and I would say avoid that by doing the discovery. The second thing is support services, including the support services that help you make decisions about digital investment, are themselves services. And if we want to improve the services that we offer, we need to think about the value those services offer, which includes for governance services, how long it takes to go through the damn thing, and what outcome you are getting at the end of it. So I hope that the guardrails in place that enable you to make that decision in DWP can make their decision quickly, as well as making sure they make the right decision.
Excellent.
No pressure.
Thank you very much. Any more? We'll take one more. Apologies, we'll take the gentleman, in the shirt in the middle.
Morning. Thank you very much, guys. Really, really insightful. James Damon-Willems from Soprist area. So I'm sure you want to bring your partners and your suppliers on the journey for, kind of driving a culture for innovation. But historically, and even still, contracts can make this quite difficult. So what do you think needs to be done? Or even better, what are you guys doing to make it easier for suppliers and partners to bring innovation?
Well, we're running user-centered design workshops with our own internal procurement and commercial teams, which I'm hoping will do exactly what I just suggested the DWP should be doing. We're not quite doing that yet. So I'm hoping that will happen. I mean, we do treat suppliers as partners, I hope. We have outcomes-based measures that we are collectively responsible for, and then we try and avoid getting into the discussion of who got it wrong.
There's a temptation to say what he said.
Yeah.
But there's an element of let's get to the place where it is partnership. Let's get to the place where outcomes are shared outcomes that we're trying to get to. Let's be more open and transparent. Megan and Tom are both coming from a culture of transparency and openness and partnership. They're driving that into the rest of government departments, in my mind. And I think as we learn and react to that and get better at that, then we're starting to see better and wider, longer-lasting partnerships with clarity. And I keep coming back to making sense of problems together. The problems that we're all facing are bloody difficult to understand, and therefore we don't have the answers and you don't have the answers. But you guess if we sit around this table for long enough, we'll come up with what the answer will be to how we solve the problem that's there. And that should be the culture of partnership. How do we make sense of this stuff to deliver something that's different, that makes a better world for where we're trying to get to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can add anything more insightful than what James and Richard said. I think a good case study on this is, in fact, the One Login programme. We've been really transparent about the partners that we're working with. There's a shared emphasis on the objectives that we're trying to deliver, and everybody feels sort of jointly accountable for making sure that they are delivered. And yeah, I think I would endorse entirely what James and Richard said.
Thank you very much. So two thank yous. Thank you to you all for the amazing questions and the engagement. That's been great. And thank you very much to the panellists. I think you've answered a whole host of questions here, and it's very, very clear that innovation is close to your agendas, indeed driving some, and that you're working with your organisations to make sure that you're extending that out into the citizen services, which is fantastic. So thank you very much. And I have the pleasure also of opening you up to the break now, which is going to last until, Matt's looking at me, I think it's roughly until about 12, quarter to 12? Yeah. Excellent. So thank you very much.